Hey everybody, welcome back for another webinar of Cockpit Counsel. My name is Tim. I'm the Chief Legal Officer at Link Squares, and with me today I've got Danielle Sheer and Andy Dale. We got a lot that we want to get into, so let's just roll right into it. Danielle, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, so I am the Chief Legal Officer at Commvault, data protection public company, and my third GC gig. And I have learned a lot about how to build my brand in each one, and I'm excited to talk about it today with you guys. Oh, and we all have our in-flight cocktails. Mine is scotch on the rocks.
Let me get mine open here, Tim, before I comment here. Okay. All right.
It's only fair. Cheers.
It's 1 p.m. Cheers. Okay. Andy Dale, the GC at Alyce. Like Danielle, it's my third GC gig. I was in-house for 5 years at TD Ameritrade before that, and I'm ready to get into it.
Awesome. So we're going to be talking about building your brand as a GC today, and I think where that starts is, what do you want to be known for? And Andy, maybe you kick us off.
That's evolved for me over the years. Danielle's the one that in a past conversation framed that so well. What do you want to be known for? I think I used to think about what's the first thing I want to do, or who do I want to engage with first when I joined. But I think that's certainly evolved over the years, as I have too, and I know you both feel that way too. I think at this point in my career, I want to be known for, being somebody that our leaders want in the room when we're discussing the hardest possible things, and somebody that they feel has built a team that can handle anything. Those are probably the two big ticket things. There's others, but I think those go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm right there with Andy. Yep, I'm right there with Andy. It's evolved over time, and so it won't be the same for everybody. But at this point, I want a seat at the table, but I want them to ask me, right? I want them to think that, wow, if Danielle's here, then we can accelerate our strategy. And just to give an example, Tim and Andy know that I am in Miami right now at a strategic offsite. It's a very small strategic offsite. Not even our entire executive team was invited. And they asked me to come. And I'm not here to make sure the contract is done. I'm here because they're asking really tough questions, and they want me to figure out how to help them get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's interesting when you think about early in your career, you are looking for face time, and you're looking for, the ability to absorb from a lot of the other executives and others around you. And it kind of evolves into this, like, okay, I feel like I've absorbed at least a little bit. Now I kind of want a little bit more. And that little bit more is, you want your view and opinion to be valued. And, at the end of the day, like, if you can navigate your organization or a handful of different organizations in the right way, that's where you get to that point, Danielle, where you are right now, sitting in the exclusive group of exclusive executives, which is incredible. It's incredible. How do you get there?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, you cannot be doing all of the work and also be the one who can see the forest through the trees. So I think you need to understand you need to cover the body of work in the legal and compliance program. Then you need to build your team, and not just build them so that you are still the central linchpin between legal and everybody in the organization, but you need to help them your team build relationships in the organization. A rising tide lifts all boats. It just helps the legal team's reputation. You're seen as somebody who can get it done. And you slowly start to, I think, kind of change the narrative. And your business folks, call Andy and they say, listen, I'm thinking about something and I just want to use you as a sounding board. But if you're negotiating contracts, if you're changing policies, if you're in the weeds on making the machine work, they won't also think about you that way. So it's about broadening your scope, lifting your team up, delegating, and getting access to those conversations, because they know that there's a team to support you.
Absolutely. Andy, how about you?
I think a lot of that is true. I think also some of that comes a bit over time in developing key relationships. That key relationship with your manager, if it's the CEO of the company, but really other key partners in the business, and that can be on the management team for sure. That can be the CTO or the CFO or somebody like that often, you know, kind of work with the legal team. But I think it also has to be with a couple layers down, people that are doing some different things in the business. So spending time and having those personal relationships kind of across the business is really, really important. And then the other thing that I try to do is when somebody does involve me in a question, particularly when that question is being asked sort of in a larger group of people, I try to make sure that my answer is not, to Danielle's point, not as tactical. It's more like, I'll answer the question, but then I'll say, you know, but like, that's the answer to this technical question, but when we grow and scale, it's going to be this, or it's going to change, or whatever we're developing, like I'm making this up, but when we're live in Europe, that's going to change. And so I think you need to be consistently showing people that your lens is strategic on everything that you're answering, even if you get asked a tactical question, because they're unavoidable. Like, they just come up and they happen. And sometimes with a group, you know, you're answering the question together, so you're going to weigh in on that answer. You know, you can't avoid every sort of tactical thing, but I think as long as it's within a very strategic lens, you're still doing what you need to be doing to kind of show what you're about.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on something Andy said. You know, you have to be building the relationships. I learned this at my first GC gig, but the first relationship I build and make them my best friends and think that I'm, you know, me and my team and my program are the most amazing things that ever walked the earth, is the head of sales. I want the sales team to believe that I'm a revenue generating legal team. And that changes everything inside the company. It changes my reputation, the legal team's reputation, because they're the squeakiest wheel. And if I can get the head of sales and the sales team to sing our praises, everything gets a lot easier. So I start there. I don't start with the CEO. That's pretty much the last person I build a relationship with, because everybody else will convince my boss how great I am if I've built those relationships with them first. And I start with sales. For me, it's the best one.
That's exactly the perspective I take too, is how does the company make money? The very first thing that I do when I've gone into an organization is, how does a company make money? Really understand that, understand some of the challenges around it, and then go and be a support system for those who are actually driving it, and try to learn as much as you can from those people. And if you could do that, you really do have a pretty heavy hand in driving that revenue forward, oftentimes in ways that even some of those leaders aren't even thinking about, right? One thing, Andy, that you mentioned was reminded me a bit of my favorite interview question. So when you talk about looking at something from a strategic perspective and trying to keep your answers strategic, a lot of times the business will come to you with a question, like a very pointed question. Hey, I need X, right? And you start to think, you say, well, what are you really going for? Like, you're just asking me to provide you some solution. What's the problem you're trying to solve?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of being an effective GC, I think, is coming into any conversation with that, where yeah, sometimes the business has an issue, they've seen it through, or it's a very simple issue or whatever it may be, come through, and they know exactly what the legal issue is around it. They know exactly how to solve it, and then you go forward. But more often than not, it's just not the case. I think people have an idea of what the legal issue is, but maybe not a full idea of maybe better ways to solve the problem. So there's this inquisitive nature that you have to carry with you. And when I interview candidates for the team, one of my favorite exercises is I try to get them to guess my dream job. All right. And so what I do is I give them 2 minutes where they can ask me questions where I'll answer with yes, no, maybe, similar to maybe a cross examination or something like that. And then I'll give them 5 open-ended questions. And so between the 2 minutes and the 5 open-ended questions, which usually lasts about 2 to 3 minutes, depending on the candidate, you learn a lot about how that candidate approaches problems, because you're going to have people coming in and say, I want to do X, Y, and Z. Like, well, wait, okay, yeah, you could go do that thing, and then you send them away, and then that thing spiderwebs into something completely different. And like, well, I had legal sign off, we talked about it, right? So you really got to get an understanding of sort of what people are looking for. So trying to maintain that inquisitive nature and maintain that sort of level of response at the from a strategic perspective, I think is really critical. If you can't do that, I think you really struggle to take you and your department to the next level.
It's important. They're your brand.
Yeah, and you're offering sort of a framework or an organization to how to think about something. And I do that constantly without anybody asking, but I think a lot of people find that valuable. They're working so fast to solve problems or to take advantage of opportunities. So just by stepping back and saying, well, what are we trying to accomplish? And almost making them talk it through from start to finish. I can't think of a situation where that hasn't been valuable and somebody hasn't thanked me at the end of that inquiry. It doesn't have to take a long period of time, but it's a matter of looking at things a little bit more holistically. And I think we're in a very good position to help people think like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you start looking at the relationship, so you've established the relationship with the revenue generation leaders, what do you do next?
Relationship's important. I think you sort of, at least I do, I sort of lay down an ethos for the legal team with respect to sales. The CEO of the first company where I was in-house on my own, that was the first day, like, they looked at the revenue, and he kept saying that to me over and over again. So we can't underscore that point enough, that you have to be close to the revenue. I think in developing an ethos with sales, it needs to be, to get their trust, it needs to be built up over time, but they're going to care about velocity. You're going to care about, is it done right? And so finding that right balance of putting fail safes in place. Danielle sometimes calls them machines, but like, whatever your process is, it's got to be clear. It's got to be relatively simple, and not too many steps and not too much technology, but you need to be QAing, what's coming through in some way, or your team does. So that's the balance I think I'm always trying to strike. I do not want legal to be a gate to sales. I don't want to be sitting there mandating that they get an NDA in every single circumstance under the sun. Like, Tim, you talk about risk a lot. Like, you have to balance risk reward. My sales team is talking about our platform without an NDA. Like, there's some risk there, but like, the deal needs to get done at some point, and so I'm not gonna lay down laws or mandates, inside the business necessarily that impact velocity. So that's sort of the ethos. I'm not going to get in the way. And then when you actually need to cash your chips in, something really bad is happening, or something, you really have to step in and say, like, this isn't going to work. Then you've put some deposits in that team's ATM account, into their emotional bank account, and you can make a withdrawal.
Yep, I totally agree. And Andy's right, I call them machines. So you build the relationship. I think that takes sitting on your hands and listening to people about who they are and what they're trying to accomplish and what's important to them. And you try to meet as many people as possible and take a ton of notes. And I think there's a lot of pattern matching that can get done there. And then you have to make good on that. You have to validate that you are going to deliver. And so I actually make a list of tactics, things that I can get early wins on. So just take NDAs, for example. Andy mentioned it. That's something that can really bog down a legal team, the negotiation of NDAs. And everybody has a different philosophy on this, but I view them as a handshake, like it's the beginning of a business relationship. And so I create an NDA template. I pre-sign it, and I tell the sales team, hand it out like candy and email it to this, after it gets signed. And all of a sudden, their handshake is that much faster. Sure, people sometimes want to push their own paper, but more often than not, if you make it simple enough and easy enough to read and the process, it creates that first step of customer delight, which then makes them happy. And then I see, what else can I solve for them? Can I start creating form agreements? Can I change maybe some of the playbooks that we negotiate on indemnification or limitation of liability that we give away anyway, and everybody's sick of having the same arguments? Can I put them, not to make a shameless plug for LinkSquares, I'm a customer, but can I let my salespeople live in Salesforce, which is what they want to do, and only talk to the legal team in Salesforce when they want to raise a contract? Man, that makes me look like a hero, because they don't have to leave Salesforce, right? And I can use LinkSquares to do that. So I make a list of the things that I can do in the next 90 days to validate that when I tell them who I am and what I'm going to do for them, I start delivering it. And to Andy's analogy, that just starts making deposits into my trust bank account with these folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and feel free to shamelessly plug LinkSquares. I mean, it's obviously a LinkSquares event right now going on. But when I think about like really what your success depends on as a GC is a couple of different things. Number one, you have to be competent as an attorney, right? You got to know the rules before you can break them, so to speak. So you need that. Number two, you have to understand what the business wants, right? And more often than not, I've found that the business wants transparency. How often do you hear people talk about the legal function? They're like, well, I sent an email, I haven't heard anything, it's been 2 weeks, no clue, right? And then as a legal leader, you want to make sure that you're able to hold your team accountable and quantify the work that you do. One of the things that Vishal's our CEO, for those who don't know Vishal, but Vishal has been really strong on is, Tim, listen, I don't care what your title is, I don't care what you did before. If you don't come to me with data that quantifies what you and the legal function at LinkSquares are doing, you don't have a seat at the executive table. You don't speak our language, right? And so if you think about those things, and you're able to, pick whatever you want to be known for, but if you're not providing transparency to the business and showing them that, hey, I have whatever it is that you're asking me to do, and I'm working on it, if you don't have the ability to manage the team that's working on that particular project in a meaningful way, and if you don't have the ability to quantify what your organization is doing, I think you're really going to struggle to get anywhere. So, it's interesting how when you're able to do those things, it sort of provides you this freedom, and it takes us into what I know we all wanted to talk a little bit about was perspectives on risk and risk taking. Like, once you sort of understand that you have this machine built, it allows you, and the business understands that you have this machine built. The business understands that they can then start to, do things that are going to add additional stress to the legal function, and they can do so without fear of breaking the legal function or otherwise breaking the business. And so, Andy, I'd love to get your perspective on risk. I mean, you talk a ton about privacy. You've got a huge privacy background. That's all the rage today, and there's absolutely risk associated with. There's regulatory uncertainty in many respects right now. You've got to be making risk-based decisions all the time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's things to mitigate and hedge the risk, and there's also sort of back to machines. Again, with privacy risk in general, it's a good one for us because we're a B2B gifting company, and we now send gifts into over 20 countries with designs to send to every country except for sanctioned countries. So like, that's a pretty big privacy scope to try to figure out, because we have to process personal information of all of those residents and send them physical gifts, sometimes to their home address. So like, we don't pick simple privacy problems, I guess, but you know, they're fun to try to solve. And I think you do have to take an amount of risk. And there are ways in which we figured out to kind of cover off and hedge those bets. You know, for example, as we are doing some of the key work around privacy compliance, like some of the GDPR kind of automation work in our systems, well, again, this sort of goes to strategic thinking. As I'm doing that project, I'm also thinking about how we scale across all these countries. Like, and all the laws are different. So every country has a different regime, a different law, or different norms. So trying to cover off on all those is impossible. So what do? You try to develop something that kind of fits the mold and gives you risk protection. So for instance, if we're sending gifts to every country in the world, we need to build the granular ability to turn off a country, for example, or the granular ability to delete data from one or more countries by country. That gives you a whole lot more runway to do things. That's the kind of thinking I think we're trying to employ. And you know, also there's sort of common stuff like get yourself a good outside counsel that sees a lot of different companies of varying sizes and has like the scope and scale and necessary experience to kind of give you advice. And I recommend having more than one in a particular practice area. Even like I don't have one privacy counsel. I know that's like sort of, some people may think that's weird, but like I don't. I mean, I have one that does a bunch of things and another that does other things for us because they're good at different things. And they're there to help me mitigate risk. So then I can go take the risk. I think really it's about like showing your thinking, you know, truly. If you don't, the one mistake is to not think about anything. And when you're thinking about talking to a regulator, you have to have an answer. You know, the answer can be one they disagree with, and then you can go fix something or change it, but it just can't be, hey, we never thought about that.
Yep, absolutely. Danielle, what are your thoughts on risk?
So I think that the law and regulations and rules, I think it needs to be innovated like anything else. And so, you know, Tim, you said you got to know the rules to break them. I couldn't agree with you more. And I view that the processing that goes on in the background of everything I'm doing is helping the company navigate through risk. I try not to talk about risk to my business partners. I try not to like literally talk about it. It's just sort of the processing that goes on behind the scenes. And then I spit out, you know, advice. But I oftentimes I get very interesting responses because I oftentimes, you know, end up asking the question out loud. Okay, if we do this, what's the foul? Okay, maybe it breaks the rules, but what's the foul here? And depending on how bad it is, okay, maybe we won't do it, but man, 8 times out of 10 we do it anyway.
Yeah.
Because the impact just isn't that big of a deal.
Yeah, exactly. And oftentimes the ultimate impact takes several other steps before you ever actually realize it. I mean, even in a regulatory environment, yes, there are footfalls that can be pretty damaging to your business, but by and large, like if you're able to manage the relationships with the regulators, you're able to really navigate through a lot and prevent a worst case scenario from happening.
And that's what Andy's talking about in having the right outside counsel. Like their job is to say, well, here's all the risk associated with this. And I think our job, and a lot of GCs can practice this, you know, as they're coming up in their careers, practice just taking that information in, and instead of turning around and saying, well, here's all the risk associated with this and here are your options, man, that's a junior GC job, that you're on your journey. But when you get more senior, you know, it's okay, I understand what the risks are. I have the right people around me who've explained that to me, or I've educated myself. This is all happening in your inside voice. And you know, what's the foul here? What's the foul if we just move forward? And if you ask yourself that question before you have the conversation with the business, you know, you end up at some pretty good business advice, I think. And, you know, you have done your work. Andy says, show your work. I say it like, show your math. You've done your work, but you do that enough times and the business just starts to trust you. And and back to what we said at the beginning, they start coming to you more and more. I want to get this done. Do you think we can get this done? You know, and that processing goes on in the background, but they know that you're not going to come back to them with like a memo that says, well, here are all the reasons why this doesn't necessarily work. And here are the certain regulations, or here we could end up in court. Oh my God, just today I got asked a question, you know, there's an employee, we want to let the employee go and you know, can we do this? And I said, sure, you know, we're all at-will employees. Are there any other facts here that I need to understand before, you know, we talked a little bit about it. And they said, but can we get sued? And I love saying this. Anybody can sue anybody for anything at any time.
Right.
But that is, why are you asking that question?
Yeah.
Like, you know, and I just want to take that off the table. Like, I don't want anybody to look at me and think, Danielle will let us know whether we're going to get sued or not as a result of this. No. That's not the lawyer I want to be. That's not the GC I want to be. That's not what I want to be known for. I want you to come to me and ask me how to get this done. And are we more right than wrong? How do we end up looking to our employee base? What does this say about our culture? How does this have a precedential effect on what I want to do next? How does this answer scale for us? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. You touched on two separate things there. I think number one, obviously the maturity of the lawyer, but number two, the maturity of the organization, right? Like, sure, like for a lot of early GCs and even GCs who just have not been involved in a lot of litigation, like getting sued is a worst case scenario. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to have a background where the idea of a lawsuit doesn't even make me like, it almost calms
You're
me
like,
down.
bring
Like,
it.
all right,
Yeah.
you too.
Yeah.
You know, but it's good, right? It's good because you go through it and you realize that at every stage of a lawsuit, there's an opportunity there, and you have to be able to help navigate those opportunities and take advantage of the ones that make the most sense, right? It's not like every single time someone files a complaint against you, the company, the very foundations of the organization are trembling, right? It takes a lot to get to that point, and you know, given the and I know I said this on our Tech GC talk last week. You know, in aviation, they talk about it all the time. It's usually not the first mistake that kills you; it's the 10th, right? Because you'll make one mistake, maybe not even realize it. You'll make another one trying to correct that, and that will actually make the problem even worse and worse, and it compounds and compounds, where every little attempted correction is actually going in the wrong direction, and then you find yourself in a, you know, controlled flight into terrain or VMC into IMC or something, like whatever it is results in a really bad situation, right? And I think it's not that dissimilar from a legal perspective too. It's like, all right, getting sued, like, probably is you know, it may not even have been something that you did wrong. It may have been a deliberate choice. Like, yeah, we might get sued for this. That's all right. Let's do it anyway. The business benefit is huge. All right, cool. We'll handle it. And then you go on through. And again, not to be flippant about what, you know, what our responsibilities are with regard to the law. Of course, we have to make sure that we're diligent and responsible and ethical in that regard. But oftentimes, most of the lawsuits you get have nothing to do with whether you broke the law or whether you acted in an ethical manner or anything like that. It's usually about money.
Yeah, and you've seen that play out in two different ways, in two big ways. The first is in the company you previously came from. I mean, the law didn't change, but the way people read the law changed. You did that. You know, you changed the way people interpret the law, and that was a risk that you guys took, and it totally it paid off. Now look at what's happening to Facebook and some of the big technology groups and GDPR and the European enforcements, right? So I think they probably made a decision like that too, saying, you know what, we're going to take the business risk here because it's maybe just too difficult to reverse engineer our entire business model. Okay, well, they're getting dinged for it. I mean, to the tune of what, $90 million today for Facebook. They're getting dinged for it. So, but you win some, you lose some, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, don't get me wrong, $90 million is a ton of money, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of money for, I think, if you have any, if you even have the slightest toe on the ground of reality, $90 million is a lot of money. But if you look at it in the life cycle of what Facebook was, is, and is becoming, it's short money, right? It just is, right? And so if you're able to make those decisions in a meaningful, responsible way, then I think you do it. It's obviously, Andy, would love to hear your take on any of this stuff.
Uh, I mean, base, I don't know. Like, I come from smaller organizations, but it's the same net effect, really. Um, I've been in lawsuits, and I agree. You don't ever set out, to have that happen. But in our case, there were situations in my past when, like, either something approached a lawsuit, you sort of were, there's that period before where you're not sure if somebody's going to file a lawsuit or not. And then, there was one, frankly, where the damages were high enough, or the amount of controversy was high enough, but we just felt morally, that we couldn't not handle it. And that,
Yeah.
and that comes with a lot of risk calculation, and, like, in the form of actual dollars. So, like, what are the actual dollars I'm willing to put at risk for a moral situation? And in that past situation, it was about the ecosystem and the industry. It wasn't about our company. So again, that's another way you show your brand, right? Like, you need to be having that conversation. Like, I'm not gonna, because all things being equal, like, avoid a lawsuit. Like,
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
settle a claim and don't deal with it. But, like, if you've been wronged and you publicly need that to be known, those are things that you really need to be, like, in that conversation with the leaders of the business, saying, like, yeah, there's some risk to it. And I think I would go as far as saying, like, in stuff like that, you really need a point of view, and that point of view has to be whatever you feel it is, but, have a take on that. There's a lot of talk about kind of the trusted advisor, or being, giving advice versus making decisions. Most of these decisions are made as groups, in groups. And so being part of that group and having an opinion, especially on stuff like that, it really, really matters.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I think, like, looking at issues that go to the very heart of your business, like, at that point you make the analysis, like, is my business going to be around if I duck and cover here, right? And a lot of times the answer is, yeah, maybe for another year or two, but, like, your business is probably not going to be very successful going forward. So you almost have no choice but to, but to actually, back it up and go and fight the fight as well as you can. And, and I don't think anyone should be afraid of doing that, right? To a certain extent, I think from a legal perspective, you're right. You've got to have that point of view. You have to know the law, and if the law is not clear, you have to have a perspective that you're going to try to fight for to get that clarity. And as soon as
those moments, Tim, sorry, but, like, those moments don't come about that often. So I think
No.
one of the things in sort of thinking about what you want to be known for in your brand is to recognize when those moments are there, and what your role is. I mean, like, you call it a bet the company moment. You could call it, you're in the middle of negotiating the exit of the business, or liquidity event, or big customer issue, like, whatever they are, they're fundamental. They don't happen that often. So really taking your time before you're kind of weighing in, and actually then weighing in, it really cements, in my view, like, who you are and what your brand is, and what your kind of your meaningfulness to the business and to the leadership of that company.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. The bet the company moments. I'd argue that there are a lot of attorneys that go through their entire in-house career and don't have one. I was fortunate enough to have one, and I'm not sure that I'll have another. Like, to be perfectly honest.
But you don't actually sometimes know that they're bet the company moments in the moment.
at the time.
I've had quite a few. And you don't realize, I mean, the one you're talking about, we all know about, right? Because it was very public, it played out very publicly. But you know, to Andy's point, you have to not wait for somebody to issue spot a question to ask you. You have had to build the relationships, validate that you will deliver, and then you get the opportunity, I think, to have a credible voice when these conversations are being had, and to have a point of view. You know, and actually, it's very interesting, Andy, that you phrased it that way, because all leaders have different philosophies on leadership and what their role is, and even, you know, amongst the three of us, we have variations of it. And I'm sure, I know many of these people, there are GCs who think that, you know, who believe fundamentally that they sort of like wait until they're approached to weigh in on a subject, right? I'm sort of the scales here, and I'm going to wait until you ask me what I think about something. I don't, that's not how I operate. And I think you have to be true to who you are. I think you have to acknowledge, take some time to think about what your strengths and weaknesses are as a person, as an employee, as a leader, as a manager, and know that what makes you successful, and then make sure that you are part of a team that will allow you to be successful, right? So just to give an example, I know that for me to be successful, I have to choose my own internal and external team. I got strengths and weaknesses like anybody else, and I have to have the people who address those strengths and weaknesses around me. That may or may not be what a company's incumbent outside counsel is, and that, you know, it may or may not be people who've been with me on my journey for the past decade, you know, but I know that about myself. And I also know that it's very important to me to have a point of view in these conversations. So I'm not going to opine on whether you, CEO Tim, the idea that you've come forward and say, well, that poses no legal risk, so I don't really have sort of a horse in this race. I want to be the legal leader that says, that's very interesting. Have you thought about it this way? Or I think that's going to be successful for us. And I'm not couching it in any sort of legal analysis, because that's the lens in which I operate. Like that's the lens in which I have to view my seat at the table. But at a certain point, and these are the teams that I really love to be a part of, you sort of check that specialty at the door when you get into some of these conversations, and you're just a utility player with the rest of the team. Yes, you've got the legal lens, the CFO has the financial lens, the salesperson has the sales lens, but I don't want to be part of a team that only wants to hear from me statements that are couched in the legal realm, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that you need at the executive level. Like, if there's a CFO who's just like, well, from a financial perspective, blah blah blah, you're like,
Right.
what are you doing at this table?
Right.
Like, really? Like, you're talking to me about the financial statements right now? We're not even talking about what's going, like, and so, like, when a lawyer does that, it sticks out like a sore thumb, and everyone's like, you know, you can hear the record scratch. What are you doing? What are you talking about?
Yes.
And it's, you know, it's
we do that to ourselves, and
yeah.
And we need to stop. Right.
Exactly. So I know we're running up on time. We had a handful of questions here. One in particular that I thought would be good is, because we're all kind of doing it right now. What's your personal philosophy on your role in being an ambassador for the company externally? Andy, why don't you take that one first? Also, your LinkedIn is completely epic. For those who do not have Andy as a connection, you need to do that. It will brighten your day every day.
Well, so that I just do that for fun, just like whatever's bothering me mostly. But that's fun to do. But I think, really when I think about I think we're lucky, you all can speak to this as well, but we're really lucky to be at a point to be able to really choose carefully where we work and who we work with and what kind of company we want to be associated with. I chose Alyce, because of its philosophy and its thinking and what it's about and who the people are that I get to work with. And they wanted somebody that was able to be vocal about Alyce as a center of trust with your data globally. And so that fits me. That's what I want to talk about. We have far eclipsed our competitors in this area of the business. They can't even scratch the surface of the depth that we've been thinking about privacy, security, regulation, anti-bribery. Like, they're just not there. And so it's a point of pride for me. That's a point of pride for the business, and that's why I joined it. So I think it's really important, and it's important then, to have the company really support you in what you do, even if it's not exactly related to the business. It's just, I'm putting myself out there, in the privacy community or something like that, and having the company back you up in that respect.
Absolutely.
So I do it because when I was at outside counsel, there were not a lot of GCs at these companies. One company that we helped buy on behalf of one of our clients had a GC, and I remember being in a room where these outside counsel folks kind of made fun of the GC lifestyle choice, and it has always stuck with me. And when I moved in-house, it continues to, it's almost like a chip on my shoulder, Being a GC is not a lifestyle choice. And I think the pendulum swung in the past decade. Companies that have 50 employees and are on their Series A or Series B are hiring a GC, and I don't think that happened 10 years ago. And so I do it because I'm not an expert in much, and that's okay. But I want to support the GC community. I think it's an important role for companies. I think companies that have GCs, good legal leaders, perform better. I think the culture is better. I think I believe in it. I believe in the role. And I'll tell you one other thing. For a long time, and maybe many people still believe this, but for a long time, people thought that the CFO was the successor to the CEO, like that's the successor role. I don't believe that at all. I think that any position on the leadership team could potentially be a successor to the CEO. I'm not angling to succeed my CEO, just, asterisk. But
it's a seat no one wants.
No, right. It's a very lonely job. But I believe that the role is critical for a company's success. And I'm proud of companies that understand that it's time to hire a GC. I'd be more proud of companies that didn't try to shove the GC under the CFO, because I don't believe in that reporting structure. I can work sometimes, but I don't like it. And so I want to be out there because I want to be supporting other GCs. And I want to support this role in a company, and I think it just it's a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah, absolutely. And on my end, I think about it, and one of the things that, as I talk to different folks who help with some of the external stuff that we're doing at Link Squares, including Cockpit Counsel, I think a lot about it. And there are a couple of things that really resonate with me. Is and it comes down to, number one, practicing in-house is just as distinct from any other practice of law as IP is from litigation, right? Like filing patents versus going and litigating, plaintiff suit, something like that. Like, they're so distinct, the responsibilities are so different that, like, literally somebody is going to say, I don't know, I'm a patent attorney, I have no idea what's going on in that area, right? And so like highlighting that and helping attorneys to understand that just because maybe you were on partner track at law firm A, B, C, D, or E, that you can come in and you know what you're doing. It's like, it's still your first day on the job, your first year on the job. You need to understand what it means to operate in this environment. So that's a lot of it. And it really is helping to, you know, to, like you said, Danielle, helping to like elevate the GC, right? And as a business person role, as a valued member of that executive team, as a valued voice in the room.
Yeah, and I'll just to put a really fine point on it, I felt like a mercenary as outside counsel. I felt like a hired gun. And in-house, you are part of the team. You are a soldier fighting for a cause. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
That has to be there.
Exactly. So, well, I think that's all we have time for this afternoon. But as always, Andy, Danielle, so great to chat with you. Thanks for coming on and taking your time. And yeah, I'm certain we'll talk soon. So, cheers.
Cheers.
Talk to you guys. See ya.